and Douglas debates.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
All right. So we can go ahead and get started. Basically, were you here last week for the online session?
No.
Okay. So basically, to start off with, um, the last time I was online, the class and I talked about slavery expanding after the Mexican War. That was like the big debate going on in the country. And so you had Senator Stephen Douglas, who's part of those debates you wanted to know about. He came up with this idea that as America moved out to the West, the people that moved there should vote whether or not they should have slavery or not. Is that kind of understandable?
Yes.
All right. And that idea was known as popular sovereignty. Um, the Democrats kind of liked it, um, especially the Northern Democrats. The Republican Party started at that time to oppose the idea of expanding slavery. Um, and Douglas was trying to get this idea going in Kansas and Nebraska. And the Republicans were trying to stop it. So that's kind of how that all got going. Trying to think. There was a presidential election in 1856 that kind of shows you how the country is being split up. So I'm going to project that for you real quick. Just give me a second. Let's see. All right. Can you see this on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the red stands for the Republican Party, and the blue stands for the Democratic Party. What part of the country has no support for the Republicans?
Um, I guess the middle part.
You mean like here where I'm pointing with my cursor?
Yes.
Um, that's kind of true. The thing is this map shows which states voted for who. Okay. Did the people in this part of the country vote for anybody?
No, they didn't vote for anyone.
Correct. And the reason that is a constitutional reason. The Constitution says that only states are allowed to vote for president. All right. And the problem that this part of the country has is they're not states yet. They're all territories. And if you're a territory, like Puerto Rico is still a territory. If you're a territory, you don't get to vote in presidential elections. So it's not the fact that they supported or didn't support the Republicans. It's the legal reason is they're not states yet, so they don't get a voice yet. So that kind of takes care of that, I think. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
All right. So ignoring that part of the country, what other part of the country has no red in it?
Um, the the blue parts.
Okay. And what part of the country is that?
It's the
You're starting to say it.
Democratic parts.
Well, like, is this the North, the South?
The South.
Correct. So the South doesn't support the Republicans. And if you think about it, it should kind of make sense because remember, the South wants slavery to expand out to the West. And if the Republicans are saying no, it should stay where it is, that's going to upset the Republicans. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
All right. So that gets you to the Scott versus Sanford thing, which I saw you did the warm up on, and you did pretty good on that. And then it gets to the Lincoln Douglas debate that you wanted to know about. What's going on is you have Senator Stephen Douglas. Remember, he came up with this idea that you're going to let the people vote on slavery. And so Lincoln wants his seat in the Senate. So he's challenging Douglas to a series of, I think it was 7 debates, and that's the picture you're looking at. I think it's a drawing or an illustration, but you see that stage that Lincoln's standing on?
Yes.
Okay. You see the guy, like, you see the glass of water by Lincoln's hand?
Yes.
Now look to the left of that. That guy with like the mullet haircut thing going on, that is Stephen Douglas. And you can see how short he is versus Lincoln. He's like 1.5 feet shorter than Lincoln. So, it grabs a lot of people's attention, the difference in height. But Lincoln was unknown before this speech, or not speech, these debates. And in one of these debates, Lincoln said that America is like a house divided. All right. Like, let me try to show you this real quick. Do that. So, like, if you got a house like this, let me try to make my camera better. Yeah, if you got a house like that, if the house is split, are those walls going to be able to stand up?
No.
No, and he's saying America is like a house divided. It's wobbly, it's shaky, it's going to fall down. And he says that America cannot stay that way forever. And what's dividing America is this idea that half of America is slave and half of America is free. And they're banging into each other. And he says that we can't stay this way forever. He doesn't think the house is going to fall apart, but he thinks it's going to come together and either be all one thing or all the other. But if he's a Republican, that scared the heck out of the South, because if he says it's going to be all one thing, the South thinks, oh my God, Lincoln's going to make it so it's all free, and he's going to come after slavery and change our lifestyle. And so the South is really afraid of Lincoln, while the North sees Lincoln as a guy who's got a good message, and he becomes very popular in the North because of these debates. Bottom line, Lincoln lost the election to Douglas, but he became a national figure, and that's going to help him going forward. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. While this was going on, Douglas made the South mad too, because Douglas said in one of the debates that if a state like Kansas, for instance, if they became a slave state and there was a town in Kansas that didn't like slavery, then that town in Kansas could ignore the law. And so that made the South mad, because they're like, oh man, they said they're going to have slavery, but they can ignore the laws and stop it. So now the South thinks that Douglas is a backstabber. So Douglas really messed himself up not once, but twice during these debates. What really brings this all to a head is you have this guy I'm about to show you in a second. Let me turn this back on. There we go. All right. Can you see him?
Yes.
Okay. This guy is John Brown. This guy was originally from upstate New York. He believed that God had put him on a mission to end slavery. And he had a few grown sons, and he and his grown sons moved to Kansas for the slavery issue, because remember, popular sovereignty, the people were going to vote. And so if you had more people who were against slavery, they could block it. And so John Brown and his sons were trying to do that. But the problem was the South was trying to send their people into Kansas to vote for it to be a slave state. So you had all these people moving in there, fighting each other, sometimes killing each other. And John Brown killed a few people in Kansas who were pro-slavery. And, it was like the Wild West back in the day, so he didn't get in trouble. And so he said, okay, now God wants me to go somewhere else to stop slavery. And so he goes to Northern Virginia. And the reason he went to Northern Virginia, there was a arsenal there. Do you know what an arsenal is?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me what it is?
An arsenal. Is it like a storage for weapons?
That's exactly what it is. Very good. So he wants to go there to take the weapons away and give them out to slaves so that they would help, free all the slaves and end slavery. But he got caught, he got trapped, he was arrested, he was put on trial for treason because, he's using force to attack the government. And so that's what they charged him with. He didn't even really defend himself. So he was sentenced to death. And his last words before he was hung is he said he hoped to wash away the sins of slavery without much blood, but now he sees that it will take a lot more blood. And so the South thinks he is a crazy guy. He is a terrorist, okay? Because terrorists use violence to get what they want. And a lot of the North saw him as a hero. And so the South used that as evidence, like, oh man, look, see, yeah, the North's helping him out. John Brown didn't do it by himself. And so this makes the South even more paranoid. And now a lot of these states in the South start arming and getting ready for war. All right. Um, any questions as far as that goes?
No.
Okay. That gets you into the 1860 election. This is a very weird election because if you look at this map here, did I think you might have done? You did the 1860 warm up last night, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. And you see how many colors are on this map?
Yes.
Can you tell me?
There are 4 colors.
Correct, because you got 4 candidates. Most of the time, you only got 2 candidates for president. But what was really weird was the Democrats split over slavery because at first they wanted Stephen Douglas, that short guy who believed in popular sovereignty. But the South is mad. They're like, no, we don't want popular sovereignty. We can't trust this guy. He lied to us about Kansas. And so they picked their own guy. And so the light blue, those are the states that voted for Stephen Douglas, and then the dark blue, those are the Democrats in the South who voted for their own guy. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then the yellow states or the gold states or whatever color that is, that was a guy who said, hey, let's just keep everything the way it is. Let's just try to get along with each other, that kind of thing. And so he kind of won. He won 3 states that are kind of like in between the North and in between the South. And so a lot of people are going to start calling states like Missouri in the light blue, Kentucky, Virginia. They're going to start calling them border states because they're kind of like on the border between the North and the South. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And the red states, including 2 states out here in the far west, these red states all voted for who?
Um, Abraham.
Abraham Lincoln. Very good. And every one of those states are free states. There are no slave states that voted for Lincoln. Every one of the free states voted for Lincoln. So this map kind of shows you how divided America gets. The deep South likes their guy, the border states like their guy, and the northern and western states like their guy. It's really showing how America's drifting apart. And so as soon as Lincoln wins, you start getting this situation where the South thinks that Lincoln is going to end slavery. Even though Lincoln said a bunch of times, I'm not going after slavery where it is, I just don't want it to move out to the West. But the South doesn't trust him, the South doesn't believe him. And so if you look at this map that I'm showing you here, can you find which state is the first one to say, hey, we're gone. We're going to leave the country. We're going to start our own country because we don't trust this man. You want to look for the earliest date on the map.
Virginia.
Well, Virginia, what date did they secede?
1861,
What month?
April.
Okay. There are some other states, like especially if you look down in this part of the country, that have dates earlier than that. So you want to try to find the earliest one you can.
South Carolina.
Very good. South Carolina was the very first state to break away from the United States. And so that was right before Christmas in 1860. Okay. Remember, Lincoln is not president yet. He was elected in November, but he doesn't become president until March of 1861. And so the president at the time was James Buchanan, and he didn't do anything. And if somebody breaks a rule and nobody does anything, what are other people going to start to do? You think other people would start to break the rules if one person got away with it?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so when South Carolina breaks away and nothing happens to South Carolina, you're going to start to see these other, I don't know if they're peach colored or light orange or what, but they all are going to break away before Lincoln is even elected. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 states. These are usually called the Deep South. And this is where most of your cotton is grown. And remember, where you grow cotton, you're going to find lots of slaves. And so, they're like so upset about Lincoln and the fact that they think he's going to end slavery. They're not even going to wait for Lincoln. They're going to break away from the U.S. They're going to start their own country. At least they want it to be a country called the Confederate States of America. They're even going to elect their own president. It's going to be this guy, Jefferson Davis. And some of my kids, think he looks a little like Colonel Sanders because he's got the little chin beard like the KFC guy has. But that's Jefferson Davis. All right. When Lincoln becomes president, he tells the South they need to, reconsider because he's got an oath to protect the Union, and these 7 states are threatening that. There is a fort that I'm kind of pointing to with my cursor down here in Charleston, South Carolina, called Fort Sumter. And Fort Sumter is running out of food. So Lincoln tells these guys, hey, I'm going to come bring them food. Don't go crazy on us. They try to blow up the ship sending them food. And then they tell this fort commander, you have, X amount of hours or days to leave the fort. The guy doesn't give up, so they start shooting at the fort. And after about a day of nonstop shooting, 24 hours long, the fort commander has to surrender because his fort's getting blown up. Lincoln says, okay, now they've attacked us. See, he was smart. He didn't attack them. He's like, hey, they attacked us. Now I have to defend the country from these guys. And so he asks all of the states to contribute men to form an army of, I think it was 75,000 men to, attack the Confederates. Now, when he did that, you see these states in the purple?
Yes.
Okay. Those 4 states said, we can't attack the Confederates because they're fellow Southerners. If you're making us choose between the United States and fighting our friends from the South, we're going to choose to go down and join the Confederates. And so that's when these 4 states left: Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. They then joined the South. So they didn't join because of Lincoln. They joined because, they were forced to choose after the Fort Sumter attack. So now you did have 7. You add 4 to that. Now how many states have joined the Confederates?
11.
Correct. So Lincoln has to deal with that problem that he's going to have to fight 11 states, and then he is worried about these yellow states up here. These are going to be called the border states for the Civil War. Because if you look on the key over here, okay, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, which used to be Virginia until they broke off from it and made their own state, Maryland, and Delaware. These are the border states. Can you tell me what makes them border states besides where they are on the map?
Um, I, they support slavery.
They do. They all have slavery, but these guys had slavery too, but they left to join the Confederacy. These states had slavery, but they didn't join the Confederacy. So Missouri had slavery, but they stayed in the United States. So did Kentucky, and so on. All right. And Lincoln is worried about these states. He's very worried because, like, if these states broke off, then I think this was in one of the warm ups. Yeah, it was the comparing sides warm up. Then you would have added about 40 to 50% more people into the South to fight, and there would have been about 80% more factories to make weapons to fight. So Lincoln doesn't want any of them to leave. He's really worried about Maryland because can you see where my little mouse is hovering right now?
Yes.
That's where Washington, D.C. is. And if Maryland secedes and joins the Confederates, then Washington, D.C. would be surrounded by southern states, and it would be very hard for Lincoln to win the war. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
All right. So that is where Unit 5 would have stopped. And then to start Unit 6, what we're doing is we're comparing the strengths of the North versus the South. On paper, this should have been a very easy war for the North because the North has 4 times as many men. So, if you're in a fight and you got one person fighting 4 people, you don't think the one person's going to win the fight. You know what I mean? So the North has 4 times as many soldiers, 10 times as many factories, 10 times as many ships, 4 times as much railroads. So everybody thought, man, this is going to be a quick fight. But the Confederates are very motivated. They're fighting on their own home ground, so they don't have to win. They just have to knock the North back. And when you're fighting for your own home, you're usually more fired up and more motivated. Another problem that the North has is they lost a lot of well-trained officers to the Confederates. And this is probably the most famous officer in the war. He's definitely the most famous in the Confederates. This is General Robert E. Lee. And a lot of people consider him like the most skilled, battlefield, tactician. He can figure out how to pull victories out when nobody else could, so the South has that as a big advantage. One of the problems that the North has is the North starts running low on gold and silver, and so they start printing paper money for the first time. This is one of the first paper bills ever printed in the United States, and it's called a greenback. Have you ever heard that word greenbacks before?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of people still use that as the nickname for money. And if you have a dollar bill, you can even look now, like trying to get that close to the camera. Like there's the front of a dollar bill, right? All right.
Yes.
The ink, most of the ink on the front of a bill is black, like the seal is green, and that part's green. But really, the green on a dollar bill is all in the back. All of that ink is green. So that's still true all the way up through today, which I think is kind of neat. So that's kind of how the North is going to pay for the war for a while. The Democrats split up even in the North in the Civil War. You have some Democrats who are like, man, I don't really like Lincoln, but the South shouldn't have done what it did and, broke off and started a war. And so those are called war Democrats. Lincoln's second vice president is going to be a war Democrat. And then you have other people who are like, man, this war is stupid. Let's just give the South what it wants and leave them alone. These guys are called copperheads because they're like, camouflaged, in the North. Like copperheads are camouflaged in the woods. You're walking around in the woods, you don't see a copperhead because it blends in with the dead leaves on the ground. You step on it, it bites you. You got to go to the hospital. Same thing with the copperhead. You can't tell just by looking at somebody in the North, or talking with them, about, sports or the weather that this person hates his country, but they do. They blend in. They're dangerous. They're copperheads. So that's what peace Democrats are called in the war. Later on, they're going to have to start drafting people into the army because they're going to run out of volunteers. This war gets very bloody very fast. Anytime that happens, less people want to join. So they have to start forcing people to join. It's also known as conscription. You might see that somewhere at some point. And there's also Lincoln makes a lot of people upset because he suspends a part of the Constitution, which he's allowed to do, but nobody had ever done it before. It's called habeas corpus. And habeas corpus basically is a very fancy way of saying that if you are arrested, you have the legal right to be taken in front of a judge and told what your charge is so you can defend yourself. Lincoln says, hey, there are so many thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of people near the border with the South. We can't trust them. We can't take them all in front of a judge. So we're just going to arrest them and hold them until the war is over, and we'll sort it out later. And so that made people upset. They thought Lincoln was acting kind of like a dictator. All right. But the South did the same stuff. The South suspended habeas corpus. The South printed paper money. The South drafted people just as much as the North did, if not more. All right. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then the last thing we'll talk about in the notes today is some issues that both sides were dealing with at the start of the war. The Confederates, remember, they aren't supposed to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Yes.
Right, because they don't have enough people, they don't have enough money, they don't have enough factories. The only thing they have more of than the North is cotton. And so what they want to do is sell the cotton to the Europeans, use that money to buy weapons from Europe and bring them back to the South. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So a couple of Southerners were caught on a British ship trying to go to Britain. The Americans took these Southerners off the British ship, put them in jail. The British were outraged. They threatened to go to war with the United States. Lincoln had to back down and let them go because Lincoln's like, hey, we can't fight two wars at the same time. We're not that strong of a country, at least not back at that time. And so that was a big diplomatic situation called the Trent Affair. Technology is going to make this war a lot deadlier than other wars. In fact, the Civil War will be the deadliest war in all of American history. It still is to this day. You have cannon shells. Before the Civil War, you would have a cannon that would shoot the big cannonball, right? When the cannonball was fired, though, it would just bounce along the ground or roll along the ground or hit something and get stuck. But now you have cannonballs that can explode. So, when a cannonball explodes, you have these big pieces of jagged metal flying in all directions, hitting people, in the chest and the leg and the head. And so that's going to kill a lot more people than before. You're going to start to have ships with iron plates on them. That's going to make them more deadly than before. And then you got here, I'm going to try to put them up to the camera. You have these bullets that are cone shaped. All right. And you see how it's shaped a little bit like a football?
Yes.
All right. And what that'll do, and I held one of these, I actually took this thing apart when the whole coronavirus thing started. I held it in my hand. These things are heavy. I didn't think they were as heavy as they were. But you have something heavy like this flying at a high speed, and the reason it's cone shaped is too, like when you throw a football, it'll go a long distance because of the way it's shaped. And so this bullet will go a lot farther because of the way it's shaped. And when it hits an arm or a leg or something, that arm or leg bone will shatter like glass, and it'll cause infections a lot of times, and that'll kill people too. And so you have this new technology that makes the Civil War a lot deadlier. Um, there are two plans that the both sides have to try to win the war. The Confederates thought, hey, we don't have to invade the North. They have to invade us. If we sit and wait, they'll have to come down here and we knock them back. If we knock them back enough times, the North will give up. All right. The North said, hey, let's not do that. Let's go ahead and wrap around the South and squeeze the South. Okay. Keep any food from coming in there because they don't have enough food. Keep any weapons from coming in there because they don't have enough weapons. And we'll just make the South so weak that they'll fall apart. And that plan was called the Anaconda Plan. Have you heard of an anaconda snake before?
Yes.
Okay. How does an anaconda snake kill its prey? Do you know?
Squeezes them?
Do you know how like kind of like a boa constrictor or a python? They all kill the same way. They wrap around whatever it is they want to eat, and then they flex their muscles and squeeze the animal until it can't breathe, and then after it's dead, then it'll eat it. So that's kind of what an anaconda does. And so they use this idea, if we choke the South so it can't get stuff, it's the same like an anaconda does. It'll squeeze the life out of it, and then it can just eat it. So that was kind of like the North strategy to beat the Confederates. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Um, that's pretty much all I've got, unless you have any questions about anything we went over today.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. So the only thing I would suggest you do is, just get caught up on the assignments and the 30 questions over the next couple of days. Once you're caught up, then just, make sure you check in on Canvas and do the two assignments that are given each day, and you'll be all set. If you have any questions about anything, you can always email me. I've got office hours tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon if you want to pop in and ask any questions. Trying to think what else. Oh, and of course, we've got spring break next week, but I'll be back online teaching class. 2 weeks from today was the 20th, so that's the next online class. If you wanted to do that.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.
Yes.
All right, I will see you later, Royal.
Okay.
All right, good to see you. All right, bye.